Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. In this video, we're going to look into the question of what happens if we throw game balance out the window in pursuit of historical accuracy. Rather than try to make all the civilizations as balanced as possible, what if we gave them their historically accurate inventions for free? Turks would lose free chemistry, Vikings free wheelbarrow for example, and this is a big shakeup for a lot of civilizations. Now, of course, this isn't going to work for every tech in the game. Fletching, for example, is a staple technology, but historically predates the medieval period by thousands of years. The nicknamed Iceman found in the Alps has been dated back to 3200 BC and had fletching on some of the arrows in his quiver, so obviously not every tech in the game is a medieval invention or has a clear origin. In other cases, technologies were lost in Europe after the fall of the Western Roman Empire and then rediscovered, which for our purposes here should still count. In fact, that idea fits nicely with the so-called Dark Age, having minimal techs available to the player, but then later unlocking Classical Age technologies. The overarching goal here, though, is just to give preference to the civilization who uses or discovers something first, so they can enjoy early access to a tech in the game the same as their real-life counterpart. I'll try to keep some organization throughout this, so with that, let's begin at the archery range. Parthian tactics is naturally named after the Parthians and their successors, the Sassanids, who were represented best in Age of Empires 2 by the Persians. Now, while the tech is named after the Parthians, we could reasonably also give it to Huns, Turks, Magyars, Mongols, or Koreans, but those feel like civilizations that should have it available rather than getting instant access to it. Funny enough, Persians don't have Bracer in Age of Empires, so as a free tech, it'd probably be a little wasted on their cavalry archers without a slight redesign to the civilization overall. Thumbring, on the other hand, I'd consider more of a generic tech. There's evidence they've been used since the Neolithic period, so it may be too universal to give to any one civilization for free. The oldest surviving example is from 1200 BC in China, though one thing we can be sure of is Tatars were not the ones to invent it. Now, the crossbow has an interesting history. It's pretty clear the Chinese used them first, though Greece invented something similar, which the Romans would naturally have been familiar with. Romans also built their own larger versions of crossbows, which was then in turn used by the Byzantine Empire as well. China should probably get the upgrade for free, but if we want to spread things out geographically a bit, there's some evidence that the Picts made reference to it relatively early, while the French were also early adopters within Europe. I'll still give this one to the Chinese for beating the others by 1000 to 1500 years, but Franks or maybe Celts could also have a small discount. Moving on to the geniture, this one is unquestionably given to the wrong civilization and should go to the Spanish. It's of course given to the Berbers in-game, but actually represents the genet, which was a Spanish light horseman and would skirmish by peppering enemies with darts and other projectiles. This one's pretty unambiguous. But now let's switch to the Barracks. Most of the Barracks upgrades seem generic enough. I'm not sure I'd want to single out any civilization for inventing any of them. Supplies, tracking, and even squires resist a nice label of who was first. Likewise, pikes were in no way a medieval invention, and the halberd is chiefly credited to the Swiss, who aren't in the game. Several of the other labels also don't make any sense, as a man-at-arms is supposed to be mounted on horseback, the longsword is supposed to be two-handed, and a lord would only have a small number of champions, mostly for ceremonies, tournaments, or single combat, and certainly not armies of them. So the whole militia line seems a little confused, or at least I am when trying to figure out what they're all supposed to represent. That said, Eagle Warriors were a class of soldier in the Aztec army specifically, so in our revised balance, they should probably get those upgrades for free, if anyone's going to. The Barracks was admittedly tricky, but luckily we have a little more to run with at the stable. First, the Paladin has a very specific use and was unambiguously French. The name refers to some legendary knights of Charlemagne's court, so we'll give Franks the free Paladin upgrade, as broken as that bonus sounds on paper. As for bloodlines and husbandry, to me they refer to the same thing and is just selectively breeding horses, which has been done for millennia. That said, Arabian horses were particularly renowned for their speed, endurance, and intelligence. They were imported into Spain and other parts of Europe, especially in the High Middle Ages following the First Crusade. They were also popular in Eastern Europe, where they were crossed with local horses to develop more effective light cavalry in particular. The Khazars' war horses, for example, were largely a mix of local breeds with Arabian horses, and even today almost every modern riding horse breed has some Arabian bloodline in it. For that reason, we could give bloodlines and husbandry to Saracens or Turks who had historically early access, so to speak, to what would be a very popular and versatile breed of horse. Jumping now to the siege workshop, the mangonel, which was actually a type of trebuchet, is originally from China, though the similar catapult-like onager was developed and used to great effect by the Romans. If anything, the two units could actually be switched in order, as in medieval Europe, the onager seems to have come first. But either way, China again seems to have beaten Europeans to the punch and could justify getting a mangonel upgrade for free to reflect that fact. Bucking an already noticeable trend though, with the counterweight trebuchet itself, we finally have an example of a tech that was invented around the Mediterranean and traveled east to the Chinese, thanks to the Mongols. But now let's move on to the Navy. The naval techs generally aren't specific inventions where there's a clear source. Careening, for example, refers to laying a ship on its side to clean or repair its hull, and dry dock refers to putting ships in narrow basins that could be drained of water, which has been done at least as far back as the Phoenicians. The fire ship specifically though, as it's depicted in game with a ship spewing Greek fire, is pretty clearly Byzantine, or at least they're the ones that made it famous, so they could get those upgrades for free. Note there's some ambiguity out there, and a fire ship can also refer to an AW2 demo ship, in which case again China was first. Of course, both civs already have bonuses for those units in lieu of free tax. As for the galleon, that was invented by two captains of the Spanish Navy, so giving Spain a free galleon upgrade seems pretty fitting. Then again, maybe Spanish should have to pay to research galleons and prototype to work out the kinks, so then everyone can just copy the idea and get it for free. Maybe we're thinking about researching techs backwards here, but either way, Spanish deserve credit for inventing the galleon. Looking now at the market, there's actually a few notable techs. Cartography and attempts at large maps of course predate AW2's timeline, but the thing is, naturally most early ones weren't very accurate or were symbolic reputations. One popular style of map in Europe was the T&O, with the Mediterranean drawn as a vague T-shape splitting Europe, Asia, and Africa, with Jerusalem in the center. While they may achieve their religious or symbolic goal, as a map you navigate with, it's not great, and probably wouldn't be a lot of help getting somewhere you were trying to go. The Tabula Rogeriana made in 1154 by Hamad al-Adrizi is actually not bad as an amalgamation of accounts from Arab merchants and explorers, and is considered the best world map of the time, as well as for the next roughly 300 years. It seems safe to say that Saracens were a little ahead of the game thanks to their prime location as a point of contact between East and West. What makes this map particularly notable though is it was created by an Arab Muslim geographer for the Norman king of Sicily, doing him the favor of exaggerating the size of Sicily quite significantly relative to Italy and Spain. Drawing on knowledge from Arabic, Latin, and classical sources, it's come to represent the best of the cooperation between Christians and Muslims in the 12th century, and fits nicely with cartography in AW2 as players sharing their knowledge of the map together. Al-Adrizi himself was actually a Berber, but I think there's a better argument for this tech going to either Saracens or possibly Sicilians. Next up, guilds isn't given for free to any particular civilization, and you could reasonably make an argument for Britons, Teutons, Franks, or Italians. It seems like Germans were the first to make what we'd recognize as guilds, so this bonus could be free for the Teutons, as they also had a famous confederation of merchant guilds called the Hanseatic League. As for coinage, it of course predates civilizations in the game, and we could give it to Persians, Chinese, or Indians, with many examples of coins surviving to today. I think we should give it to the Byzantines though, who had a lot of experience using bribes and tributes to maintain their empire, which was often seen as preferable to a military engagement, so they feel the most fitting to get the tech for free given it's meant for sending tribute. Moving on to the Blacksmith, for the infantry techs, iron casting and blast furnace are pretty clearly Chinese inventions. The blast furnace allowed for the creation of pig iron and appeared in China around the turn of the 1st century, a good 1,000 years before arriving in Europe. Things are a little different though when it comes to armor. Scale armor, for instance, was used by ancient Egyptians, but was also widely used in Persia and the Byzantine Empire, so a free tech to either one would feel appropriate. This might also just be a case though where it's too generic to give to a single civilization, as it also seems to have been invented independently in China, Japan, and Korea as well. As for the next upgrade, chainmail, this has actually been credited to the Celts, who we haven't had a chance to give a free tech to yet, though this is referring to the Iron Age continental Celts, which isn't necessarily the same thing as the so-called Celtic nations in Age of Empires, but I think it's close enough for our purposes here. As for plate armor, the way it's represented in Age of Empires was another European invention it seems, or at least a rediscovery after falling out of use since the Classical Age. It seems though it was more of a gradual shift from mail to plate armor rather than one particular kingdom inventing and completely embracing it first. I think this is another case where we'll just leave it as a generic technology that no one gets for free. Jumping now to the university, the big one here is of course chemistry. In this case, it depends a bit on what exactly we mean by that term. If we mean alchemy, then there could be an argument for Saracens, Persians, or Indians being the most fitting, though if we mean gunpowder and cannons, then this is undoubtedly another one for Chinese. There's a general opinion that Chinese had guns first, but after gunpowder spread to Europe, it seems Europeans really ran with it and unlocked their potential. If we really do mean the first to have hand cannons as we see in Age of Empires though, then this one's all China. The first proper cannons were also used by China, and considering what the tech chemistry unlocks, I think this is pretty obviously theirs. There's sometimes arguments that China invented gunpowder but didn't use it for warfare, and the arquebus is definitely a Turk or European invention, but the first recognizable thing that we would call a hand cannon, I'm convinced, is from China. On the other hand, the treadmill crane was actually first used by the Romans until disappearing from history. It was then the Franks that seem to have rediscovered and recorded its use next, so we'll make this a free tech for them. That's a bigger change than it sounds, as at present they don't even have access to it in the first place. As for the Monastery, of course, block printing was famously invented in China, where it was used to print on fabric and later paper, though it also seems to have spread quickly to Japan and Korea as well. It would be hundreds of years before being improved upon in Europe with the printing press, but since we're specifically referring to block printing and not the press, again, we have to give it to China. Finishing up with the ecotechs, this is again all China. Everything from wheelbarrow, bow saw, horse collar, and heavy plow are recorded in China hundreds of years before appearing in Europe. If you feel the game balance was already tipping too far toward China already, it's really the economy where they turn into an unstoppable powerhouse. So to tally up the changes, we have 1 for Persians, 2 for Spanish, 1 for Aztecs, 2 for Franks, 1 for Teutons, 2 for Saracens, 2 for Byzantines, 1 for Celts, and 12 for Chinese. To answer the question of what would happen if civs got their historically accurate text for free, it turns out China would be very overpowered. One thing I find pretty clever is they actually have a bonus to reflect that in a general technology discount, and having to pay less for every upgrade is a convenient way to make sure they stay at the forefront of the tech curve. That'll do it for this one though. Special thanks to Seb, Yang, James, Jean-Paul, Jockster, Kyle, Justin, John, Samantha, Woodruff, and everyone else on Patreon for their amazing support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.